The ancient circle of wisdom. Micheál could see that the Geis still had a hold on Matha. He knew Matha would not be able to take up the offer of Fianna training from Conan any more than he had been able to take up the offer of lodgings from Una. The road was calling him. All was calling. He was already resigned to the fact that he could not rest for more than a night in one place. As he was leaving Tara to continue his search for the way back to his home, Micheál said to him, "You will find your way." "Why do you believe that?" said Matha, who wasn't at all sure. "Because many people lose courage when they meet trouble. That's the only test that counts. You have met adversity, and you still have heart. I have the bruises on my back to prove it." Conan laughed and shouted after him, "Humour is at least as important as courage, boy. Of course, some men not only lack courage, but also lack humour. Keep away from lads with no gaiety. They'll drown you faster than that rode into the bog water you could ever have done." For another year, Matha traipsed often on little used pathways. He traversed dense forests and desolate mountains without fear or excitement. If the Machtira or any other force wanted him, they could have him. He hardly cared. But the Machtira always seemed to turn away. As he went, he sought wise people. He tried to gather wisdom from brehons, poets, druids, and herbalists. All he needed to find was just one wise person who knew of a way to make his valley peep out from under its fold. As time went on, he learned much. He came to know secrets, given to him readily by some of the truly learned healers and gifted priests. Word of his quest was travelling before him, the news flying from home to home faster than he could walk. He worried that the belief in him having powers also continued to spread. Some people were now convinced that he had more powers than their local healers and druids. In some cases, this turned out to be true, but only because their local healers had not even the power of common sense. They made sick people worse by sending them away from the warmth of their firesides, away up mountains to search for holy water, or applying ointments that made wounds blister. Many of the seers had never done anything other than find a few stray animals or lay cold hands on a sick person, making them jump up. Most had never heard of such a thing as a folding mountain. Some nodded sympathetically, thinking he was lying about ever having had a home, as if he had been walking this way forever. The better poets were at least entertaining, with words like sharpened blades cutting the ground from under the power-hungry, the greedy, and the inhospitable. He spent many good nights by firesides where poets and singers transported everyone away from their troubles. The local wise men and brehons were the least help of all. Some had spent years learning to recite various complicated rules and set themselves above people, maintaining an aloof, learned air. But he gradually realised with dismay that after only a few years of travel, he already knew more about the way of things than most of them seemed to. It was unfortunate that his opinion of wise men was already somewhat faded at the time when he decided on his return to Tara. As bad luck would have it, in the time he had been travelling, the place had become a den for those same tedious old coots. Matha had decided that it was time to go back to see if the Geis would at least allow him to spend some time in the company of Droleen. Unlike many of the fellows and women he had sought counsel from in recent times, the old wren man had always told him up front that he didn't know the solution to his puzzle. Matha was finally starting to accept what Droleen had told him long ago, that only he himself could discover the solution. Maybe if he spent time just watching Droleen's ways and observing how he thought about things, he might one day see what it was that was supposed to be obvious to him. As he arrived at the first camp of Fianna soldiers near the main settlement of Tara, he was taken to their commander. He knew this woman. She was thin, with long red hair tied in plaits. She wasn't sturdy looking, but her reputation with the sword was already the makings of many a legend, and as a leader, she was spoken of with fearful respect by all. She was Leah ní Choncain, one of the youngest commanders and one of Micheál's most trusted. Matha found it hard to believe looking at her, but people said that if you crossed ní Choncain, she would go through you for a shortcut. She recognised Matha and welcomed him. "You're tired of travelling?" "I came to look for Darren." "And there I was thinking you were here to accept a welcome in my house," she laughed. "I'll go into any good house where I'm welcome, but there is a restlessness in me and I can't stay as long as the welcome lasts. That might not suit you." "You're assuming your welcome would last longer than it might," she said dangerously. "Besides," said Matha, "I wouldn't want Micheál to hear I was intruding on the work of his finest protege." She laughed again. She always took it as a great joke that people whispered about there being more to things with her and Micheál than met the eye. She sent a one-legged woman to bring food and drink for herself and the traveller. They sat down together to eat. There were no more pleasantries. Leah was impatient. Quickly, and with only moderate politeness, she found out from him exactly why he was there and what he wanted. Only then did she reveal anything. "Darren is not here at all. Neither is Micheál. Off walking along the seashores somewhere in the west. They've taken a sudden, unexplained interest in trying to calm stormy waves. And the king, too, is away, visiting relatives. Indeed, the great chief Brehon, O'Rahilly, is away too." Matha could hear from her tone that she wasn't the fondest admirer of the last-named person, a man he had never before heard of. 9 months before, O'Rahilly had arrived. He appeared in the middle of a field in Gruagáin, in the far west, and broke a loose stone wall with fright when a harmless ram that was in the field came up to inspect him. He caused a bit of a stir when he arrived in at the nearest cabin. There lived 3 very well thought of and light-hearted old people, 2 brothers and a sister. O'Rahilly was dressed in colourful, tight garments, the likes of which had not been seen. He spoke a language that was very different, but still somehow understandable, that put the best face out and gave him a great welcome. He claimed he had come from a different world, but aside from the multicoloured cape he had put on himself, for some reason thinking it would be suitable attire when visiting weary, rain-soaked people, he didn't look all that different than any other old gooch. He had a red face, greying hair, wide ear flaps, a soft belly, and an eye that often landed on the niece whenever she visited. After that, the novelty of his appearance wore off. He didn't amuse the people or their neighbours one bit. For a man who claimed to be in search of wisdom, he rarely listened to anyone other than himself. He would sit in the best seat by the fire and stay there all day long, never offering a hand with any work. He would only stir out to the table when food was on the go. He was a master at consuming eggs, milk and meat, on the rare occasion they had a bit, but he was not much good at turnips or oats. He would talk away then about how he had seen through all the beliefs of his own world, how shallow and selfish it all was, how he had realised what great wisdom lay in this world. He talked about shamans and druidic ceremonies and the fineness of Brehon law, while the people just looked at him in bewilderment. He had found a way to travel here, where he felt he really belonged, to come to celebrate this wondrous way of life and to be part of it. The good people of the West had enough troubles keeping themselves alive from one end of the week to the other, and his admiration of their wisdom was very little use to them. They knew their bellies could not be usefully filled with hot air. They weren't long about seeing the need to get rid of this O'Rahilly, nor were they long figuring out what would get him to go. "The place you rightly belong is Tara," said one of the old boys to him one day, because I fear that such fine words as yours are wasted on ignorant ears such as ours. Ah, no, that's not true, said O'Rahilla. Even the most ignorant have a right to hear fine words, though I do think Tara would be a more fitting place for me. The old girl had a mouldy lump of sheep's cheese ready for him to take as a gift to Cormac. They provided him with the services of a nephew, who was to escort him as far as the Shannon. When he was leaving, he never put his hand into his bag to give them any kind of gift or token of appreciation, although they had noticed that it was a heavy bag, and had had many discussions about what might be inside it. O'Rahilla was so pleased at being on his way to Tara that he barely said goodbye, seeming to be of the opinion that the honour of his visit had been mostly theirs. You'll get closer to the centre of wisdom over there, the oldest of the three people in the house said after him, and you're more likely to meet your own kind. O'Rahilla recounted this to everyone he met, thinking it was a great thing. He didn't notice the smiles it threw on listeners' faces. On his arrival at Tara, he again caused a stir because of his unusual appearance and language. He was eventually brought through to Cormac's main hall, where he was introduced. Micheál was there with Dermot and Cunahan. Droleen had been there but disappeared. He wasn't long settled before a big meal, when he started again with his praise of the wise ways of the people and times. Well now, Cormac said, it's always good to learn how others see us. There are some who think old Cormac is making a mess of things, just muddling along. He paused to look around. Commendation for the state of things in his kingdom was a naturally pleasing thing for any king to hear. So now it'll do the begrudgers good to hear that people from sophisticated other lands can see a bit of sense in the way we do things. The other said nothing. From the start, O'Rahilla's entire focus was on the king, and he barely acknowledged the presence of anyone else. Your Majesty, he said, I have brought you humble gifts from my world. The gifts that had stayed in the shut bag when he was eating the winter store of butter of the old people in the west now appeared. He took out a delicate silver spoon that Cormac's daughter added to her collection, and a grey box that played a kind of screechy music. Fortunately, it only worked for a little while, and he couldn't get it working again. There was a piece of iron that fired small lumps of metal, loud and fast, into a tree stump. O'Rahilla said that should be kept for enemies, but Cormac wanted to test it. After only a few minutes, it too ran out. The tree stump hardly affected. Micheál was happy enough to leave them at it. If it kept Cormac amused, that did not seem such a bad thing. The next time Micheál was in Tara was 2 months later, and Cormac was away. The people had been told he was visiting a cousin who was a king in a country to the east. But in truth, Cormac had no cousins out in that direction, and no interest in visiting beautiful palaces. In fact, Micheál had escorted him secretly to a desolate island off the northwest coast. The king was travelling with Darren, his fairy woman. There was a wedding in her clan, and Cormac didn't need his arm twisted when he got invited to such events. The little people knew how to mark an occasion. Their sprees of merriment and abandon were more to Cormac's taste than decorum and ceremony of politely representing his country in foreign capitals. The reason Cormac wanted his whereabouts kept secret was that not everyone in the population at large approved of the king's association with the other people, especially not his wife. So he always thought it best not to injure them with too much information. The festivities were only to have lasted 2 days, but after Micheál had left him, a terrible storm had risen up. Any boat venturing out on such water would certainly be escorted by a giant wave to be eternally bonded with the floor of the ocean. The seas had not taken a rest for going on 2 months. People were starting to ask about why Cormac was so long away. Micheál had been pacing off the coast all this time, waiting for Cormac. But then, to his fury, a messenger arrived with the following summons. The O'Rahilla decrees that you are to meet him in Tara. Micheál did return to Tara, but only to set O'Rahilla straight about a few things. The fellow didn't even have the authority to address Micheál, let alone to command him. Micheál found himself in the company of Droleen, Diarmid and Gowl, all grumbling for the same reason. At least he didn't summon Conan, said Diarmid, after some time spent trying to find a positive or calming thing to say. So maybe there's a bottom to his folly. Maybe he realised that Conan might have torn the head straight off him, while at least we all will listen. Will we not? In the High King's great gathering hall sat O'Rahilla in a very large cushioned seat that he had placed right next to the Cormac's empty chair. He was wearing a tunic that looked very much like the shiny green one that Cormac was supposed to wear at certain ceremonies. He was talking to the woman who was washing his toes and did not look up. He was saying to her, "We must celebrate the nobility of our people. We must acknowledge and affirm." After leaving them standing for some minutes, he finally raised his head. "Now, my fine fellows," he said, "I cannot tell you how proud I am to sit here before you." Gowl was scratching his empty eye socket in confusion. "I believe that up to my arrival, the people may not have been fully awake to the greatness of the era that we live in," said O'Rahilla. "What we have here is great indeed, and will be the envy of wise people from many other worlds into the distant future, believe me." Micheál went about leaving, mumbling that he had a sick hound to attend to. No, wait, my good man, my famous hero. We have brought you here for a reason." The bristles stood up on Micheál's neck, but he bit his lip. The man was still a guest, and allowance had to be made for his confusion about how things worked here. "We think the people may need from time to time to be reminded of how great and fair is the system of government they live under," continued O'Rahilla. "A gathering. That is what is called for. A coming together of the most enlightened, the Druids and the Brehons, and of course yourselves. And I have a vision of us all going out to travel among the people, going from village to village in a great celebration of our age of enlightenment and of the greatness of our Tuatha. You are more than welcome to be with us in our place and time," Droleen spoke quietly, turning away. "And the hospitality that Cormac extended to you in our presence, we are not going to question in his absence. I am also glad for you that you find the good that is in our land, and I can only wish that you continue to be spared from experiences of a sort that might cause you to go away with a more mixed impression." A chill ran through the assembly. Droleen's words were coldly chosen, but O'Rahilla was oblivious. The chill turned to foreboding when O'Rahilla said, "You should not turn away from me. Your strength lies here, on your own. You're just a little man." "Why would I take offence?" said Droleen with icy calmness. "You are old. You'll be dead soon." The others left with Droleen. "Look, I didn't want to pull this out," O'Rahilla shouted after them. "I had hoped we could work cooperatively. But I have to tell you now, before his departure, Cormac gave me the title of Chief Brehan. As such, I command you to stay." "What is that?" Diarmid asked Micheál as they walked away from Tara. "Does that mean we have to obey him?" "Oh, don't mind him," said Micheál. "There is no such thing as a Chief Brehan. It was just Cormac amusing himself." Micheál decided to leave things be. Cormac could sort things out when he came back, having made the mess in the first place. Besides, O'Rahilla appeared more likely to harm himself than anyone else. But O'Rahilla was more determined than they had given him credit for. After they walked out on him, he declared that the senior military people could only think in straight lines, and so, in fact, it was for the best that they had deserted. Their proper place was outside the gates of Tara, defending it, not inside, advising. He interrogated the working staff for the names of poets, other druids and brehons. He sent messengers to them. This time, maybe learning something, he did not instruct them to come to Tara. He told them he was forming a circle of ancient wisdom, and they were cordially invited to be part of it. No poets attended. They were not in the habit of responding positively to requests from any person. Neither did druids attend. They dared not step under the dangerous cloud that was Drolean's displeasure. But a scattering of brehons came, as did an assortment of other people who were very surprised at being included on the list. The staff had amused themselves by supplying O'Rahilla with the names of certain individuals who had never in their lives before been accused of wisdom. When His Royal Highness returns, he will be pleased that we have not been idle, said O'Rahilla to the gathered men. He will be pleased that we have reformed Tara into a place of great thinking. This is the end of an era of domination by soldiers and farmers. He will instead be supported by men who carry the collective wisdom of the ancestors in their very bones, his own circle of ancient wisdom. And this period shall be remembered as a time of great enlightenment in Erin. Micheál received reports from some of those in attendance. The more he heard, the less easy he felt. He decided that it would be wise to drag Cormac back from his merriments immediately, rather than sobering this new chief Brehon by causing him some injuries. He went back to the coast, but the storms still didn't ease as he impatiently strode between the fishing villages, trying to find one boatman ready to brave the waves with him. Sure enough, O'Rahilla was not satisfied with his achievement so far. He asked his circle to take a journey. They were going to visit settlements all around the country, explaining to the people about how this collection of wise men was going to be helping the king to make every decision. How the government of the country was going to be more learned and wise than ever before. They headed a little south of Tara. The first place they got to was Ballyhaig. O'Rahilla asked that the chief of the clan gather his people. The chief welcomed the visitors warmly. The people of that clan were not fond of planning or work. Even though they happened to be on the best land in the country, most years their food stores ran empty and they had to go out looking to borrow food from neighbouring clans, even before the worst of the winter started. They were happy about the visit from Tara, because such occasions were always marked with rest and drink. They didn't care that Cormac or Micheál weren't there. But they were completely unnerved when they discovered the visitors had brought no mead or barley wine. They were amused by the funny accent of O'Rahilla and listened to him for a few minutes, but then they wandered off, leaving only one person listening, an old man who sat on the ground looking up steadily at O'Rahilla. The chief Brehon got over his disappointment. He decided that even if only one person listened, it was a start, and word would spread. O'Rahilla lectured the little man for hours about shamans, white witches, just laws, and great learning. Not even the little circle of wise men he had with him had a clue what he was on about, or when he was going to shut up. When it came to nightfall, and O'Rahilla had finally tired of talking, they thanked the old man and asked him his name. He didn't answer. Only when they asked him again did they realise he was completely deaf and hadn't realised there was going to be no food nor drink. It was about this time that Matha had arrived into Leah's company. When he heard how things were, he thought that maybe he could do worse than follow the travelling show. Surely there was some wisdom he could gain from someone from another world, even if the stranger was not well liked. He caught up with them easily as they were slowed by the treacle of conversation. They were a day out of Ballyhaig on the way further south. As was his cautious habit now, Matha decided to make his own track through the trees at the side of the path, rather than introduce himself. There were 20 of them, including the bald-headed man in the mad green tunic. The talk was of next going to Balladrona. Matha was surprised to hear the wise men advising O'Rahilla. Though he was young and didn't like to think disrespectful things about such esteemed elders, he could not help feeling that they showed no signs of wisdom. He had travelled through these areas and knew some things. He was shocked to hear one of the wise men tell O'Rahilla that the reason the Haig had stopped listening was because they were industrious people who couldn't be away from their fields for long. He was even more surprised to hear the advice that the next audience, the Drona, were thoughtful, peaceful people. The advisors had obviously never met either clans before, and knew as little as O'Rahilla, who at least had the excuse of having arrived in this world recently. Matha's experience of the Drona was in fact of suspicious, harsh people, who regarded thieving from and lying to other clans as honourable. He had passed through their territory fairly quickly, not receiving any offers of hospitality other than from people who thought he might have something they could take from him in his sleep. As he walked further, he was even more worried to hear O'Rahilla's plan for keeping the attention of the gathering this time, where he had lost it last time. He said to the others, "Now, this thing that I'm about to tell you is a secret that I didn't even reveal to His Majesty." There was a great hush in the huddle of harmless fellows. "I have in my bag some powders for making great bangs and flashes of light, things I took the precaution of bringing from my world. These will surely impress the people of our wisdom and get the attention of the Drona." Given the temperament of the Drona, Matha began to form the opinion that the clan meeting might be one that Micheál would like to attend. Just as he was deciding to head off in search of Micheál, he saw a woman approaching. He could see she wasn't a farmer or a soldier. She was tall and soft-skinned. She wasn't very old or very young either. Her head and shoulders were draped in a black mourning cloak, and she walked with a kind of limp, looking at the ground and whispering as she proceeded. She didn't acknowledge the men on the track until she was right up to them. She eyed them quickly and silently, weighing them up. Matha would have been very wary of such a person, but O'Rahilla seemed to lack any basic sense of the kinds of people there are in the world. The woman cast an assessing eye up and down him, and Matha could see a fleeting smile as she looked at the green tunic. Then all of a sudden she fell down at O'Rahilla's feet, and she started bawling and wailing and ullagoning. He was horrified and tried to get away from her, but she just grabbed onto his legs. He calmed down a little and appealed to the others. "Get her off me, get her off me. What is it? What is it? What ails this woman?" "Quiet, woman," said one of the other men. He gave her a slight kick and said, "Quiet," before the great Chief Brehon, "and say your say calmly. We are here to listen." She looked up at the man who had kicked her, and then back at O'Rahilla. She stopped the wailing abruptly and said, "Alms, great man, alms for a poor wretch who is in mourning." "I am sorry, but I have nothing to give you," said O'Rahilla. "Humble apologies, ma'am," said another of the travellers, one who was clearly not that happy with the way all this was going. "What is your loss that grieves you so?" "Oh, kind sir," she said, "I have lost everything that has any meaning to me." "Her mind it is she has lost, I'm afraid, gentlemen. We can't be detained by this," said O'Rahilla. She looked at him again. The eyes had turned from amused to scathing. "We are most sorry for this, good lady," tried the more sensible Brehon, who was becoming ever more worried. "Is there anything at all we can do to ease such a terrible pain?" She immediately stood up and went over to O'Rahilla again. She touched his bag. Oh. This man says he has nothing to give a poor person stretched out on the road in front of him. Just get her away from me, O'Rahilla said, reddening in the face and pulling his bag away from her. Then she started laughing. She began to walk away from them, laughing and laughing and laughing. As she put distance between herself and them, Matha could already hear words bouncing from her mouth. The tone was scalding, and the only phrases he could make out before she faded into the distance had the metre of dangerous satirical verse. The unfortunate person so honoured, he suspected, was Chief Brehon O'Rahilla. Matha now knew it really was time to round up Micheál, and he headed off at considerable speed back to Leah's camp. Leah didn't waste time either. She called a lanky hound that seemed to live under the eave of her cabin. All she said to him was, "Bring Micheál." Matha didn't ask how she or the hound knew what part of the long shores of the northwest that Fionn would be found. But before night fell, the hound was back, with Micheál rushing in to ask Leah what was wrong. Leah pointed to Matha, sitting at the fire. "It's getting so my heart sinks every time I see you," said Micheál. "You are not bringing me good news, are you, son?" Matha arrived back in the lands of the Drona, accompanied by Micheál and Conan, reaching it well before the slow-moving circle of wisdom. They observed from Clonmore Woods as the company found a suitable river crossing. They were down to 19 now. The man who had spoken with respect to the woman had apparently decided to leave, and Matha noticed that O'Rahilla seemed to have developed a niche. He was trying to reach down the back of his tunic and trying to scratch the soft soles of his feet. He was getting irritable and blaming the missing Brehon. The three observers moved quietly parallel to the track, keeping under cover of the trees, though it was hard for them to remain unnoticed. What with Micheál breaking down small trees and the roar of Conan's curses as he tore his way through the skachs. A man working in a field stood up to look at the party as they approached one of the Drona fortresses. "My good man," O'Rahilla said to him, "go and tell your chief that he has a visitation from Tara." The thin, dirty man squinted at them for a while, unsmiling, and then hid his hoe in some long grass in case one of his brothers would steal it. He went off slowly without a word. A few hours later a man came down from the fortress. Micheál knew him as the chief of the Drona. He was also thin and squinty. He had sandy hair and a crooked, lipless mouth. "Aye, yes, from Tara," he said, in a tone that wasn't yet entirely lacking in caution. He scanned them further and said, "Where is the boss man, then?" "Can you call your chief, my good man?" said O'Rahilla. "Where is the boss man?" asked the chief of the Drona again. "The king he is away, somewhere, for this while back." One eyebrow was raised, and a curious look now came across the face of the gentleman of the Drona. Micheál knew that in that one moment the calculating brain inside that narrow head had made a judgment and was sniffing an opportunity. Now there was certain to be trouble ahead. The man started to walk back towards the fortress. O'Rahilla was getting frustrated at this stage. He decided to use his tricks, though he had really only intended to use them in front of the assembled clan for maximum effect. He pulled out a grey object from his bag. It looked like a large blackberry. He pulled some kind of a needle out of it and flung it aimlessly. It rolled on the grass after the chief, who turned round thinking the group were hurling stones at him. He came back to inspect whether it might be of use to him. As he picked it up, a very big noise and flame came from it. Everybody looking on was surprised. That included Micheál, who had rarely seen anything as colourful in all his travels. It included the Brehons and wise men, who were now deserting O'Rahilla in numbers. It included the other Drona, who were emerging from the fortress and fields. It included O'Rahilla, who looked like he hadn't expected the thing to work. It didn't include the chief of the Drona. Unfortunately for him, he was now spread in small pieces around the patch of onions next to the path. Micheál emerged from the bushes. O'Rahilly looked at him with a mixture of relief and consternation. "You may need a few more of them," he said to O'Rahilly, pointing to the gathering masses of Drona that were approaching with rocks, sickles, pitchforks, clubs and axes in their hoary hands. O'Rahilly looked down for his bag. It was gone. They saw a girl running off with it faster than a hare. "Welcome to Drona country," said Conan, stepping forward too. Micheál and Conan faced into the mob. "Good people, what happened here was an accident," said Micheál, not thinking for a moment that they would accept this, but he had to try. "This man is a guest of Cormac. Recompense, if any is due, can be discussed with Cormac upon his return." It turned out that the Drona, like their chief, weren't all that interested in justice. The man whose parts were now nourishing the onions had obviously not engendered great love amongst his own. Their taste for revenge was smothered by their pleasure at hearing that Cormac was indisposed. The canny Drona knew immediately that they weren't being told the whole truth. They assumed therefore that Cormac was either sick or already dead. Either ways, they were calculating that this meant the country was heading into a period of mayhem, as there was no obvious successor and there would certainly be contenders. Such periods were like harvest time for people of their sort. Their elders taught that periods of change provide the cloak under which boundaries could be redrawn and old scores fixed. The Drona were hard-working people at harvest time. The only art they ever tried to study was how far you could push other clans without finally provoking them into a violent backlash. They nearly always got that wrong. Consequently, they had a lot of experience in fighting and were as wicked as pine martens in close combat. "Very well, we will wait," said a shrewd middle-aged man among them, with not a line of truthfulness on his wrinkled face. "As soon as Cormac is back, send us a message so we can go to see how he is prepared to go to fix us up for the loss of this fine bucko or beloved chief." One of the things that O'Rahilly didn't understand was that in those times, fine and noble though they might have been, enemies were waiting on every wind, waiting for a smell of weakness in the land. Once the delicate balance broke, there were people outside and inside ready to take their chances. By this stage, however, O'Rahilly couldn't have even thought about making such an observation. He was now overcome with itching. Red blotches were breaking out on his face and arms. For the first time since landing, he was lost for words. Micheál left Conan and Matha watching the Drona fort, while he took the soft visitor up in his arms and ran back to Tara with him. He put him in a room and told Leah to give him a bath and some milk of docks to put in his skin and to guard him so that he couldn't get out to make more mischief. Then he came back to sit with Conan and Matha, who were still watching the gates of the Drona camp. He had not for a minute believed the Drona assurances and was surprised they had not emerged the moment darkness had fallen. They waited another while, still nothing. "Maybe it was wrong to distrust them on this occasion," said Matha. Conan and Micheál both laughed. It finally dawned on Micheál that he had been outfoxed by the Drona, having forgotten they never left anywhere by the front door when there was a back way as convenient. They went quickly into the dead chief's homestead and found only women and children. The women threw scalding water at them and refused to say anything about where the men were gone. But they saw the tracks of the back fence and squeezed under it the same way the Drona men had done. Possibly an hour before, heading in the direction of Kinchealig, judging by the footprints. The Kinchealig were a quiet people. They were fond of music and timid about fighting, so as a result their lands were much smaller than they had been in times past. Whenever the Drona would make an encroachment, the Kinchealig would say things like, "Well, sure, maybe it was the will of Dagda, and maybe our luck will follow the land they've taken." By the time Conan and Micheál caught up with the Drona tribe, they were already chasing families from their cabins on the western part of the Kinchley glens. Go on out of this, they were shouting. The old king is dead, Dagda at his soul, and there's no law in the land now, only the law of the strongest, and there'll be no mercy, only what we show, and that won't be much for anyone that stays behind. Matha had been sent to Tara to call for help. Micheál knew that there was one thing that would put the fear of Dagda and Morrigan into these otherwise fearless rogues. When Matha returned with Leah and a small group of her men, they found a standoff. Micheál and Conan were swinging swords, and the Drona were throwing stones and taunting them from a safe distance. Conan was swearing. An old Drona woman was walking in the middle, tormenting him. What are you going to do? Decapitate our sons? In a quarrel over a few feet of wet ground and granite? Great heroes indeed. They were right, of course. Neither Micheál nor Conan wanted to go any nearer to these people. They knew what would happen. They would be hit with axes and clubs by these nifty little fighters, and eventually a sword would start swinging in anger and heads would roll. There was no way to come out looking good out of a skirmish that involved decapitating farmers. Leah, on the other hand, had skills that matched the occasion admirably, as did the men she had brought with her. These were all men she had trained in a brand of combat that had been honed over generations in her family. When the Drona saw her, they laughed. Micheál, you're sending a slip of a girlfriend to do your fighting. That I am, my friends, Micheál laughed back, and welcome. We'll see how well you have learned your stick fighting, stoning, kicking and biting now. Leah didn't need any bidding. She had thrown on her sword. Once she saw it was only a bunch of fractious vegetable growers she was facing. She and her 10 men went forward like terriers. Within a minute they were among the Drona. There was howling and yelping. Matha took the spectacle as a consolation for having stayed so long out of his home valley. He had never seen anything like it. Leah's men were impressive, but nothing compared to herself. She was fast and furious. She rained blows and kicks in every direction, never missing her target and never hitting it softly. She was shouting and screaming and jumping. No weapons, just her feet and her fists. All that impatience unleashed. The Drona left the scene within 5 minutes, leaving a splattering of their clan blood behind to dampen the Kinchley ground. The easygoing Kinchley, of course, didn't want any vengeance. Their chief said, well, they've done a bit of damage, but sure, what about it? There won't be a word about it by Bealtaine. Then he gave a bold little smile and looked at Leah. Anyway, I don't think they'll be gracing us with their company again any time soon. Back in Tara, they found O'Rahilly worse. He was covered all over in hives and was so busy scratching himself he couldn't even think of eating, let alone making wise proclamations. Matha started to feel sorry for him. What happened to the man? Asked Roline when Matha asked if he knew of a cure. Matha said there was no sign of him gotten stung or eaten any fruit off the road. Or had started there. Then he remembered the woman. It was immediately after meeting her that the itching had started. When he described the woman, Conan laughed. My friend, said Micheál, turning to O'Rahilly, you went out on the road to preach wisdom, yet you hadn't the wisdom to pass the most basic test. O'Rahilly was hardly listening to him. A woman laid out on the road in front of you in great distress, and you refused her alms and didn't offer her a bite, a drink, or even any words of comfort. That makes 2 women who have saved your bacon in 1 day, said Conan. O'Rahilly stopped scratching for a moment and looked at them. Leah you know about. The other woman, by the sounds of her, was Trasany O'Neill. She is the chief poet in our little country. She is the one who could have imparted more wisdom and entertainment to you than all of the fools you had with you. But you walked past her and failed her test. But she just looked like a mourning widow, and I thought, how was I supposed to know she was in some way important? Complained O'Rahilly. Widow, indeed, said Micheál. who considered Nigonal a close and prickly friend. The only thing Tressa mourns for is the dearth of wisdom and good humour in people that she meets. And this was her cruel punishment, cried O'Rahilla. Persecution worse than flames. How does that make you say she saved me? She didn't kill you, did she? Said Conan, laughing more. With the verse she composed for you as you pushed her away, she only gave you a rash. You'd need to thank her for her mercy the next time you see her. What kind of world is that you come from? Asked Leah, looking at O'Rahilla, curious, you know. You have survived to have the grey hair, and yet you say a bit of a rash is the worst thing that ever troubled you. Are we to believe that you've never experienced a bellyful of hunger, a head full of thunder, or limbs that collapse out from under you through fever or injury? When the Drona came to extract the honour prize of their dead chief from him, said Conan, I'm afraid our friend here may gain some experience in other forms of torment. What are you on about now? Rahila stopped scratching for a minute and looked with alarm at the smiling, bearded giant. Oh, I'm afraid Conan is correct, said Dermot soberly, joining in the entertainment. No matter how little honour there was in that fragmented man, the Drona aren't the kind of people to go light when calculating reparations due to them. Curses on all of you, you bloody barbarians. I don't want to endure this ignorant mocking, said O'Rahilla in a squeaky voice, as he disappeared entirely in front of their eyes. Though nobody devoted a thought to where he had gone, it was assumed that he had made his way back to the world he had come from. Nor was it known whether he ever found a cure for the rash once he got there. The next day the weather calmed, and the little people delivered Cormac safely back to land. When he returned to Tara, it took him a few days to get out of his depression at resuming his chores after a flaw to end all flaws. Only after a week did he remember to ask about the visitor who had amused him slightly. Oh, he went on about his travels, was all Micheál thought it was necessary to say. Grand, said Cormac. It was getting time for him to go right enough. Matha moved over closer to Droleen and asked if he could spend some time with him. You can and welcome, Droleen said. But you have already spent more time with me than you know. I think that if I am with you, it may come to me how to unfold the hills. Why don't you go back there now, said Droleen, and look again? The disappearance of your valley had nothing to do with your bad neighbour. He doesn't have those kinds of powers. Only you do. And you'll see it now if you're ready to. Matha was confused and excited at the same time. He had been back many times to check that things had not changed. He couldn't accept that he hadn't wished it enough. Yet somehow he was certain of what Droleen had said. He was ready now, and his home would be there.